Rod Willis is the author of an amazing new book, Ringside, which, by the looks of this, it looks like a Cold Chisel book. It reads like a Cold Chisel book, but, Cold Chisel is only a very small part of your story in here, Rod.
I mean, when I originally looked at writing this, which was a number of years ago, it was actually still when I was managing Cold Chisel. I said to Don, I said, "Oh, I'm going to write my memoir as such, but what do you reckon?" And I said, "It's going to be about my not just Cold Chisel or Icehouse or Dirty Pool or such. Excuse me. It'll be about my whole life." And I said to him, I said, "Who do you think should write it?" And he said, "Well, you're the only one that can write this." Well, I thought, okay. Okay, so that's kind of how I sort of approached it. So instead of having to tell people things and then get them to put it all together, I had to sort of plot the thing out. That's why it took about 13 years to sort of write.
I mean, when we look at the music industry today, I mean, it's all people with law degrees and, diplomas and whatever, people who have never got their hands dirty. You actually came out of the school of hard knocks. And when we actually have a look at the career of who Rod Willis is and how that DNA came about to qualify you for what was to come later, you can take that right back to when you were a kid, and you grew up in an entertainment background, didn't you, with your parents?
My father was a journalist, funnily enough. Out of school, he worked for The Sun, which was Packer's paper in Sydney. And he eventually got a job at MGM Movies in the publicity department there. I tell the story about the first time I met anybody famous was I met Alfred Hitchcock. My father, I don't know how old I was. I mean, but I remember he came down the stairs at MGM and he had this sort of like rotund kind of bald guy, and he introduced me to him, and he said, "This is my son Rodney, and this is Alfred Hitchcock." And I don't, but I remember that as being the first famous person I sort of met. But my father then, he progressed when television started in Australia. He got a job at Channel 7 in Sydney as their publicity manager. So even in those early days of television, when it was all live television as such, we were often, as a family, my three siblings, or my two siblings, we would go in there for, they wanted they wanted an audience as such for one of the TV kid programs like Captain Fortune Show or whatever they were, and we'd get brought in and those kind of things. So I was very sort of aware of the kind of entertainment side of things, the entertainment business as such. So yeah, I was kind of raised in that environment. We were the first ones to have a TV set, I think, when the black and white TVs came out in '56, I think it was. I think we were one of the first families, certainly one of the first, Prior to that, we used to have to go down to a local TV shop and everybody would sit outside on the pavement looking at this black and white TV sitting in the window. And
head down to Norm Provins and look through the window.
Exactly. It was like that, exactly. And you couldn't hear anything because the cars would be going past, So, and the old because I remember because there was a lot of Italian ladies around that area, and the old nunnas would come and sit there in their sort of like a chair with their knitting, watching this apparatus in the window,
Yeah. Well, Dad's job got you in front of the Beatles, though, didn't it?
Well, that was the other thing I was going to say. There was a couple of things that sort of happened out of that. The access to getting tickets for the Beatles, which my parents never knew, but I actually wagged school to see the Beatles arrive at Mascot.
There was also, I guess, an unconventional type home life too, because you talk about Uncle Mal in there. And, I guess, with the mum and dad and your relationship, or your mother's relationship with Uncle Mal, did that sort of give you a background on how the dynamics of relationships work. So later in your career, when you're working with a band, you could sort of juggle the various relationships that were in a band.
From a very early age, I guess I knew how to deal with extra sort of situations, if that's the way of putting it. I can't think of a better way of putting it, you know. And I learned when I was overseas working with bands too. Slowly but surely, I went from the sort of the just doing stage and sound and lights and all that kind of stuff to being a tour manager. And then, of course, you're getting closer to the flame of being a manager, which is, of course, is what I really wanted to do.
Dealing with those relationships, and then having the background in the entertainment industry, and then going on to manage bands is not something you can have with a law degree or an education diploma.
Well, no, I don't think you can study anything like that. I think you have to live that sort of life, you know. Um, I can't see how you can deal with it in any other way.
You went away for 2 years to the UK, stayed 11 years, came back to Australia, and the whole music world had changed. Suddenly, we had television with Countdown and Sherbet, Marcia Hines, Hush,
Yeah,
all these acts that didn't exist when you went away. Suddenly, we
yeah.
had a new generation of music acts. Did you have to re-educate yourself at that point?
When I arrived back, I was kind of looking. I had made that decision that I would wanted to become a manager as such. And so I started looking around at bands. My younger brother was sort of directing me to different bands. I mean, I think AC/DC was still here, but was literally about to get on a plane and disappear. And I think more than anything, when I went to Adelaide with Cold Chisel the first time, is when I went to the Largs Pier, and I was just absolutely blown away by the audience that they had there, and they weren't known in Sydney. They were lucky to be able to pull three men and a dog kind of thing. I mean, that sort of changed fairly quickly, actually. But the thing was, I started to realise that there were a lot of young bands out there starting to come, and it took quite a while for media as such, radio and that, just because they were still hanging on to the pop idiom as such, you know. And Countdown was very, responsible for that, and you can't really blame them. And it was very, very influential. Countdown, there's no question about that, you know.
Well, Countdown was a very important part of the story, wasn't it? The destruction of the set at the Countdown Awards that year. It's still firmly implanted in my head. I remember sitting there
Yeah.
watching it on TV. It's a moment in rock and roll in Australia I'll never forget.
Well, you can imagine what the poor bastard that's sitting in the audience that thinks that all the awards have gone, the band is gone, they're off somewhere laughing about what's just transpired. I had shrunk down in the seat to, I think that if my head was sticking above it, I'm not quite sure. And I had calculated that there was no more awards. Well, my calculation was a miscalculation. Suddenly it was like, and the award for the best album cover of the year. And I remember thinking to myself, please, 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 God, no, not. And the winner is Cold Chisel. So, of course, I am sitting in an environment where people are looking at me with daggers because mainly it's industry people. So to them, it's like, how could you have done this? How could you have orchestrated this? This is like, this is just shocking, absolutely shocking. You've killed the band's career, blah, 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 blah. So I then had to stand up, walk the walk of shame. And as I've said a couple of times, the big thing that I was worried about was the stairs going up. I thought, if I fall flat in my face, then, everybody will be laughing. And I sort of went up there and grabbed the award, said rock and roll or some sort of inane thing, and then came back. But the look of people around me, there was only one person, that was Eric Robinson, my old friend from Jan sadly passed. He put his hand on my shoulder and just whispered in my ear, "Oh well," you know.
Did
Oh
you know in
well.
advance it was going to happen?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We orchestrated it. Yeah, yeah. There's no question that there was only myself, the band, and the road crew, and it never leaked out, which was pretty interesting. Why it didn't leak out? You would have thought somebody would have, oh God, I'll wait till I see what happens tonight, sort of thing. But it was to the band, it was probably very easy for them to go through it because they didn't accept any of the awards. I accepted, or myself and the record company took turns in accepting the awards. But I remember the kind of feeling when it was getting close to it. And I remember when they actually came on stage, my wife grabbed my hand and sort of like squeezed it as if to say, strap yourself in, here we go. And it was a punt. It was a punt. There's no
Yeah.
question about it.
Yeah. Cold Chisel had a very short innings, pretty much the same length of time as the Beatles, and then broke up. But you, Rod Willis, went on. Dirty Pool had formed and become quite a premier. Well, premier is probably the wrong word to use, considering who was down in
Yeah,
Melbourne.
right.
But one of the forerunners of the management teams for bands in Australia, but also a touring company. I mean, you were touring a lot of big international artists around that time. Tears for Fears,
Yeah,
Paul
well,
Young. I think the
that's right.
first Simple Minds tour of Australia was you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing was, we'd always thought of it. Well, we'd had a sort of initial sort of dealings with Simple Minds and XTC, which we helped bring out, and they worked with Icehouse in the very early days, sort of thing. But because we knew the agents and those kind of things, they were always saying to us, "You guys need to start a promotions company, and we've got all these bands. We like the way you present things. We like the way you do things, and the creative side of it and whatever. How about bringing some bands out, like on a serious note?" We realised that we were only newcomers, so that's why we got in contact with Michael Koppel, and we teamed up with Michael because we needed somebody like Michael to as much as we'd done promotion, we hadn't done it at that extent. We'd done the pool resources and those kind of things, but we it's a bit of a different game. Anyway, the first band we brought out were the Stranglers, and then we brought out, like I say, Paul Young, Tears for Fears, Howard Jones. There was a number of them, and because I wasn't, Cold Chisel had gone as such, had finished at that time. I got the sort of Guernsey as the head of the promotion company as such, which was really interesting. I enjoyed that period, and maybe it was something that I should have continued on, even though Australia seems to have more promoters than they have kangaroos.
Then we get to the point where Cold Chisel reform and the negotiation that goes on with Michael Ginsky with that. So that gives us a real insight how did the brain of Michael work, doesn't it?
Absolute nightmare because, yeah, I mean, look, you understand that Michael, he invested money in Jimmy and whatever, and we could understand it, but it's no point in understanding it. We had a set of principles that we were going to. Everybody had to be free, and we were lucky. Ian was. It was so initially it was really only Ian and Jim, and then what happened was Mushroom stupidly let Ian go. So that only left Jim. Now, of course, that's a major, major hurdle. And Michael's like he's like a leech. He hangs on there. He's not going to let go. And Don he was adamant. There was no way we were going to acquiesce. and it became a lot of problems. And you know, it was a part of my life that I didn't really enjoy, even though in hindsight you look back at it and you think you kind of get some perverse sort of thrill out of negotiating with Michael, as Michael sitting on the toilet and yelling out to you from another room, you know, in the bathroom, you know. And you remember that bathroom we had there? It's like his office. It's like myself and Gino, is my financial guy. We're sitting there just looking at each other, going, like this kind of thing. It's Michael with the door half open. We couldn't see him, but there's like, you know, it was very funny. It was very very bizarre.
Yeah,
You know,
and again, that experience doesn't come from a law degree.
no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And Michael doesn't come from a law degree, so you've got to get down and dirty with Michael. And there's a lot of arm wrestling, and you know, but in the end, it all worked out for all of us. In the end, we did a deal, and when I was first said to me about the band getting back together, which was Jimmy who had approached me. Um, uh, you know, I just didn't think he was serious about it. But and then, of course, stupidly, I approached Don on a flight back from Mullaney in Queensland, and he berated me the whole way back. And if I could have got a parachute, I would have jumped out. You know, it was one of those kind of things. You know, like, and then the next day he rang me and said, "Let's talk about this reunion." But that was just the start. And then it took what 96 was when I first started, like talking to them. 96, it might have even been even earlier than that, like late 95. But anyway, whatever the case may be, it took about 2 years to get the whole thing rolling, you know.
Yeah.
It'd be on, it'd be off, it'd be on, it'd be off, you know, that kind of.
Yeah, well, it's a remarkable book. This is the book Ringside, and it's not a book about Cold Chisel. It's a remarkable insight to the workings of the Australian music industry, told firsthand from the man who was there and making history happen. So thank you for your service to the music industry, firstly, Rod, and thanks for putting it all into a book that we can all learn from. And I'd rather read that than have a law degree.
Well,